Good afternoon, and welcome to the virtual Agile Shift session. Before we start, please take note of the question mark icon in the upper right corner of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answers feature, which allows you to send questions to be delivered to our presenter at the appropriate time. We are excited to present Greg Major, Director of IT Innovation at Gulf State Financial Services, and he will be speaking with us about managing agile teams. Greg?
All right, well, thank you very much, Will, and good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's having a wonderful quarantine. Boom, ching, bad joke. So I'm very, very privileged. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to spend some time with you guys and talk a little bit about what it takes to manage an agile team, and really also stray into leadership principles and things that I personally try to embody, but I believe are paramount to really being an effective leader and growing an effective team. Today we're going to talk about we're going to start with kind of three things. We've got the blockers. I want to talk a little bit about blockers that can get in our way. We're all familiar with the term blocker probably through our own development experience, and even for us in leadership and management, we have blockers as well, although they tend to be a little bit more on the squishier side. And then I want to talk about your job as a leader. And notice I didn't say manager, I didn't say director, I didn't say president or anything. I said leader. I want to talk about your job as a leader as the team develops. And then finally, if we, assuming we've got a little bit of time, I want to talk about developing your leadership style and really talk through what that means and why it's so very important. So I do want to echo what Will said. Be sure I'll be setting aside some time at the end for questions and answers, or hopefully answers. But be sure to get those in, get them ready, and we'll save some time towards the end where we can get into that. So with all that being said, I'm Greg Major. I'm super happy to be here, and let's get rolling. So, like I mentioned before, the first thing I want to get into are some of the blockers, kind of setting some of the stage here. And one of the things that makes this less about just being a general, management or leadership kind of talk, is that we are talking through Agile. We're talking about Agile teams. And the first thing that came to my mind whenever I sat down and I started coming together with notes for this is I thought, well, what makes it different? What is the thing that really sets it apart from just your day-to-day, leadership and team building? And it's really one of the principles of Agile, and that is that the teams are embodying that very notion of self-organization, or at least should be. If you're living it, if you are Agile, then absolutely that should be a big part of it. And where that can be a blocker for any leader, whether you're just new to it, you're just kind of dipping your toe in. If you are a developer or citizen, if you're in there, you're coding every day, and you still find yourself in leadership positions, or wherever you're at in the organization, that self-organization aspect can be a little bit startling to us, in particular because we're sort of taught as leaders and as managers that it's our job to get people to work hard and to achieve the goal, and that can be difficult to reconcile whenever we start to talk about self-organization. Wait a minute, how does a self-organizing team balance with this job of the manager and the leader to get people to work hard? That can be a little bit of a mental blocker, and we'll talk through some of that. Another thing that comes up is we might be working in an organization that values the right now answer over the right answer. And that can be very, very challenging, whether you're just adopting Agile or you're building a new team, you're setting out on a new journey. That can be a little difficult. But by building out a great team, following some of these principles, following some of these ideals, you can overcome that. There's also, let's not shy away from it. It's been talked about a lot, but just like with developers, there is an imposter syndrome for leadership. And that's certainly something that can block us, get in our way. Guys, look, I'll level with you. I wake up every morning with imposter syndrome, and it's one where even after 25 years in technology and leading countless teams at this point, I don't even know how many, I still I still wake up and think, wow, man, do I have a clue what I'm doing? The answer is probably not. But you know what? That's okay. Because if we are agile and if we're truly embodying the principles of agile, what are we going to do? We're going to get better. We're going to take those lessons. We're going to improve and apply those improvements. That's why you're here, right? That's why I'm giving this talk, and hopefully why you're here to listen. And then lastly, as we're starting out something new, if you're building up a team or if you're starting out, you're probably also worried about, is this thing going to come together? I'm here for a reason. I have a mission. We have a mission. The company is looking to do something. Is it going to work? I don't know. So, I wanted to set the stage not necessarily on a negative note, but I did want to kind of lay out some of the reasons why it's so important that we as leaders and start to think about, well, how do we improve? How do we manage the team? What are the things that really matter? So with that, I'm going to jump into something that may be relatively familiar, be familiar to some of you, but not to everyone, and that's fine. And we're going to talk about Tuckman's stages of group development, but I'm not going to go through and just kind of list it out. You can read this material, you probably already have. But Tuckman's stages of group development fall into 4 categories. You have forming, storming, norming, and performing. And they all have different characteristics. They all have different behaviors. They're all sorts of things that you as a leader can observe and kind of see where your team is at. Even if it's not a new team, maybe you're just coming into a team and now you're a new leader, or maybe you come up through the ranks, or whatever the case may be, starting a new team. You need to have some of those clues to kind of know where your team is at, and more importantly, to be able to watch for backslide, which we'll talk about. So with that in mind, we're going to jump right into the first stage, which is forming. So here's what's going on. When you're bringing a team together, we're going to talk about just let's kind of take a hypothetical where we're just bringing a team together brand new from scratch. I've done this several times. Part of my journey with Gulf States Financial Services, or GSFS, is doing very much that same thing. And what's going to be happening right now, the things that you're going to be watching for and sensing, what you're going to be seeing, is that really your team's coming together. They're just learning about the mission, right? You've gone out, you've found the very best talent. You're recruiting. You're finding all the folks that are going to be perfect for the job or the mission at hand. But everybody's going to kind of gather and go, great, boss, what's up? What do we do? Let me at them, right? There's going to be a lot of excitement about the new thing. And with that, it's going to come some kind of, I don't want to call it a downside, but you're going to have processes and roles and things that aren't defined yet. As you're first building out, as you're first bringing everything together, you're going to find yourself in a place where you simply don't know everything, and certainly the people you're bringing on, they don't know everything. They have a clue. You brought them there. They have an idea, a vague idea of what that mission is. They kind of have a sense for it, but things haven't really been laid out at this point. And hopefully you've got some mature members, some folks on the team that maybe have got a little more experience. They've been around the block once or twice, and if you're lucky, then they are going to start modeling some expectations. They're going to start exhibiting behaviors that are really setting the standard for the remainder of the team. And I'm not talking about, I've got senior people and junior people and that kind of thing. I'm talking about folks that have, like I say, been around the block. They know kind of what the score is. Hopefully they're already, adjusted to an agile mindset. And they're going to help to show what some of those behaviors ought to be. They're going to lead by example, right? Now, here's the thing. Your job, and as we go through each one of these stages, I'm going to be talking about what your job is. And your job during this stage is to coordinate. If I'm going to give you one thing during the forming stage, it's coordination, right? So right now the team is starving for knowledge and guidance. Okay, that's exactly what they're looking for. You've got great, capable people. They're ready to go. And if you do nothing, if you don't do your job, then it's going to fall to pieces very, very quickly, right? So your mission here is to coordinate. You want to find as many opportunities as you can to get your people engaged with understanding what the business is, right? So this is a part of defining the mission, defining what it is you're setting out to achieve, but getting context. I see this time and time again, and it's so very frustrating where a development team will spin up, or you have an organization that says, okay, great, we're going to go build X, right? And we have this great idea. So they go out and they hire, all these great folks, right? People with families and great careers, and they get them all in. They say, here's your great desk, and here's your new machine. Go get them, Tiger. And then they don't actually take any time to explore and understand the business. They don't make the people available that already know what it is that you're trying to achieve. So, as we all know with Agile, it's so very important to maintain or to build and maintain a relationship with our business, to understand what those goals are, and to be able to adjust and shift, right? As things are happening, we have to be able to say, okay, well, I understand the context, I understand, or maybe I can read between the lines. So one of your jobs during this phase is absolutely to go and get those people in front of as many of your business users as possible. Don't just talk to the VPs, don't just talk to the directors, don't get in there, set them down. If you have the opportunity, pair with them for a day or two a week, get them side by side with your business. Because you're going to gain so much from that. It may seem like a waste up front, and you might have a few people that are writing the check saying, really, I thought I hired this person to write code. But I'm telling you, the dividends are absolutely precious. You got to do it. You got to do it. Another thing is we're kind of talking about is we're taking a hypothetical where we're building a brand new team. When you're building out that team, take some time to really blend your team. Now, I'll tell you, at Gulf States, and this is very much a kind of a personal philosophy of mine, is that I try very, very hard to make sure that I'm hiring people that have roughly equivalent skill sets. I'm not going out and finding a DBA. I'm not going to go out and find the Postgres guy or this guy or the JavaScript guy. I really take the most value from finding people that have a breadth of experience. Some of the people that are probably on this, or hopefully watching me here, are probably rolling their eyes whenever I talk about the fact that I really, really value polyglots. Folks that know multiple languages, that are well versed in not just, say, example, .NET, but also things like Python and Golang and JavaScript and TypeScript and all the things, right? So that's very important to me. It's also a little shocking to some folks that we don't have BAs and we don't have QA. What I have is a highly capable, highly competent, professional group of operators that are in there that do all the jobs. They own the code, right? So they're helping to get the requirements. Sometimes they are absolutely helping to guide and shape what the product looks like. They're also designing, they're architects, they're writing the code, they're testing the code. It's their job end to end to deliver an amazing product. And I have faith in them to do that because, those are the folks that I'm out there hiring. But, even if you don't take it to some of those extremes, I highly recommend blending your team as much as possible, just in terms of not necessarily a homogenous environment, but making sure that you've got folks that can speak each other's language, that can talk to one another and connect on that technical level. That is super, super important. Some other things, you want to make sure that you're giving your team a place to share some common knowledge. This is a very, very common mistake, and I've made it, so I can tell you that it's at least common in my world, where it was, is that, all too often you're starting out, your team is starving for that knowledge. They're looking for that coordination. That's your job. And so as it is at that moment, you are the oracle. You are the one they're coming to. You're the one they're looking to provide that information. And you can't always be that guy every single time, where you may talk to, one person one day, they have a question, you answer the question, they go away, and everybody else still has the same question, but they didn't ask it, and so on. So find a way to make sure that your team has and understands that you have a common repository. I don't care what it is. It could be GitHub pages. It could be any kind of wiki. It could be, it doesn't matter what it is. Just make sure that your team knows that it exists and that they have the access to use it so that they can begin capturing that tribal knowledge, that communal knowledge that is so very, very important. Otherwise, if you feel like you're answering the same question over and over, it's because you are, and it's because you failed to do this. You didn't get yourself set up, and you didn't get your team set up to really be able to share that information. That's kind of the forming stage. Look, it's the it's the honeymoon, as it were, as you're building a team. It can be very, very stressful because again, you're trying to find all those right folks, you're trying to hire and recruit, and meanwhile, the clock's ticking on whatever it is that you're building. So, but don't lose sight of the fact that your team really, really needs you to lay out some process, to set some expectations, and move forward on that front. The next stage in Tuckman's stages moves into storming. So storming, that sounds a little dramatic, and it is, frankly. So what's going on in the storming phase is that people have kind of settled down a little. Maybe you're starting to work on some things, and you're starting to get a little bit of motion, right? You've got, maybe you're a sprint in, you've decided how long your sprints are going to be, or if you're doing Scrum. But anyway, your team is going to start to, their personalities are going to start to show, right? And this is really cool when you know what's happening and when you sit back and watch. It's sort of like if you had, you've gotten past the first 15 minutes of a superhero movie, and now your superheroes are kind of discovering their abilities, but their personalities are also starting to show a little bit. And look, we're all human. We all have different perspectives. We all have different emotions. We all have different fears, different goals, objectives, all the things, right? And so as soon as those personalities start to bubble up, that's unfortunately when conflict starts to arise. And that's where you as a leader really need to be in tune to that. Look, people's behaviors are, and especially in the storming phase, they're going to be driven by fear and anxiety, right? These are the same folks that you bring them in, you start to get a little bit of traction, they're getting around all these other talented folks, and they're probably suffering a little bit of imposter syndrome themselves. They may be looking around and saying, "Ooh, do I belong here? Am I good enough for this?" That's something you really, really, really need to be empathetic towards, and you really need to be in tune with. Look, your job as a manager, as a leader, whatever your title, as a leader, your job during this stage is to coach. You just became the coach, right? And your job is to really keep a very keen eye out, looking for rubs. Okay, you're looking for anything, any squeaks, rattles, rubs, anything that's not quite fitting together, and believe me, they're gonna be there. If you say that, oh no, I built a team and there was never a problem, you weren't paying attention. There absolutely were, it's just you weren't engaged with it. So it's really, really important that you understand that and also prepare for that conflict, right? You need to be mentally and just, you need to be 100% prepared for the fact that you're going to have 1, 2, 10, or however many people that just aren't going to click at this point. There's going to be that whole discovery phase of, well, I don't like what this person said, or this person's taking all the good stories, or whatever the case is. You're going to have some rub. Just be ready for it. This is a part of what you're doing. This is a part of why you're there. Is to help through that, and it's a lot of that soft skill. As developers, oftentimes we really discount the importance of soft skills. I went probably, well, some folks that work for me now would say that I still haven't learned it, but I try very hard to be empathetic and to listen. The very best coaching you could ever do is to listen for at least 90% of the time. And then offer up any advice you may have, but put yourself in their shoes. I mean, You've probably been there. You've probably been in similar situations. But, just be ready for them. Engage with your team individually and collectively. Let them know that you're there. Let them know that they're heard. Be their coach. Be that person. Other things that you need to be doing, though, during this time is over-communicating. That's probably the biggest one overall is you need to over-communicate any decision that is made, right? This one is and in particular, this one also echoes into all this remote working that we're doing. But also when you're in this particular phase, over-communicate decisions because people need to hear the same message, and they need consistency from you, and everybody needs to understand what those decisions are. So, talk to your teams, talk to them individually, talk to them collectively, send it in an email, drop it in Slack. Not just one of those things, not just two of them, all of them. Over-communicate that. When you think that surely everybody has it, everybody's grokking this, do it one more time. Just do it one more time for me, and then you're probably in a good place. Other things to look for is, this is oftentimes with Agile the time where you're going to discover where you didn't have quite enough planning and coordination up front. And look, it's going to happen, right? Maybe your stories aren't quite shaped in a way where the team can really bite into them and deliver them. Maybe the definition of done is a little shaky. Maybe you don't quite have your CI/CD set up. Maybe the process is kind of rough for things out into production, and what does support look like, when that comes up? And those things start to bubble up as well. So pay particular attention to those things. But also remember, this is your first opportunity to lean into that self-organization. This is a spot where, okay, you know what, you're right. The CI/CD pipeline, it's taking too long, or it's not quite right, or it requires somebody to go in and click these 4 buttons. Cool. You may know the best way out of that. You've been around the block. You may know exactly, okay, here, look, let's go do this. This is your first opportunity as a leader to empower that team to go and solve those problems. Do that. Take the time, walk back from that problem, and let them go solve it. This is super important because you're not going to get out of storming unless you can find a way for the team to gel on a personality front, but also to solve those problems. You're teaching the team how to work together to solve the problems that you're having. And if you can't solve the development problems, you're never going to solve the business problems. So I'm not saying every time, but certainly more than once, just say, look, guys, yeah, absolutely, this is a problem. Take some time during this sprint or during this whatever you're using, and you guys go out there and you just make it happen. Go solve that. And you're teaching them, you're showing them how to work together, how to bond, and how to resolve things. Unfortunately, you're going to get some conflict from it. Some guy's going to be like, I love Jenkins. He's wrong, but anyway, I like Jenkins, and this other person's like, no, I want to use, whatever. You're going to get those kinds of things with highly competent, highly capable, professional technologists, right? It's just going to happen. So you got to watch out for conflict. You got to be there. You got to be ready to coach. And I'm actually asking you in some cases to sort of light that match and let it happen, because that's how your team is going to get out of that storming phase. Another aspect here that I want to touch on is, and this kind of goes to forming, and it also goes a little bit to storming, is make sure to not create roles that are too siloed. I see this one quite a lot too, and it's where, okay, well, I've got this person over here, or maybe two or three folks on the team, and they are the UI people. Yeah, they know JavaScript, and they know how to do Angular or React, or what is it, Tuesday? So whatever the framework is today, they know how to do that, and so all the UI stuff we'll toss over to them. And this guy's the database guy. It goes back to what I talked about with blending the team. You gotta watch out for that, because what will happen is you'll create little factions or fissures in the team, and suddenly you'll have little cliques that form and problems are going to start. You're never going to get out of storming if you don't have a little bit of blending there and you're watching out for not creating roles that have very specific responsibilities that can't be shared across the team. So watch out for that. So enough about storming. We'll all go through it. Next is going to be norming, right? And norming is all too often a stall for so many teams. But really, what's going to happen, what you're going to notice during norming, is that the team is starting to settle into itself, right? People have established kind of where they are and what they're doing with the team, where they belong with it. But also, ideally, if you've been doing a good job, they're starting to rally around the mission, right? They know what the objectives are, and they're starting to say, okay, you and I, it's like, how many times is the old trope of, these two guys hated each other, they got in a big fight, and suddenly they're best friends. That does play out. There's some reality to that. And when you get into norming, you start to find that, okay, well, we have a mission at hand. We've gotten past that, and we're starting to kind of to rally around that. You'll notice it also, and you'll kind of know that you're crossing into that when you start to see that the team itself is starting to value that cross-functional behavior. And what I mean by that is, or to give an example anyway, would be, let's say you've got one developer over here, he's picked up a task, he's doing some coding, he's been, working on it for a day or so. And then, he kind of stands up and says, man, I could really use a second set of eyes, or can somebody help out here? Or maybe somebody just volunteers and said, look, I see you're probably going to get swamped with unit tests on this thing. Let me jump in and help with that. Or, hey, I see that we still have some questions for the business. Maybe I can go run those down for you. You start to see some blending, and the team is pulling together and really rallying around the work, and not focus so much on, well, that's not my job. Or you wrote it, you tested, that kind of thing. Ultimately, the other thing to watch out for, and this one is fascinating if you're a student of human behavior, is that you'll start to see people forming bonds. You'll see friendships begin. You'll see, in particular, keep an eye out for what I call a wingman or wingwoman, wing person, whatever you choose. But watch and see, like, okay, who's taking off and going to lunch together that maybe they weren't before, and that kind of thing. It's not a bad thing. It's an indicator that you've probably moved out of storming, or you have been moving out of storming and more into that norming phase. So some indicators there on what's going on. Now, what's your job? Your job during norming is not the most difficult, but it is super important. Your job is to empower. And that's, that word, right? What is empowerment? Is that just like telling somebody to go just figure it out? What is empowerment? Empowerment is, again, the embodiment of self-organization. If you were taking my advice before, especially on the storming piece, and walking back from being the guy that's making all the decisions, then this is going to be a little bit easier for you. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is give people the trust to be able to go and make decisions and fail. Hopefully succeed, but occasionally fail, just like I did, just like you do, just like everyone does. Give them that opportunity, show them that trust. I heard a great quote just today that was, if you want to enable someone, or I'm sorry, to influence someone, allow them to influence you. If you want someone to trust you, then you have to trust them. It's that same give and take. But the empowerment is one that's rooted in trust and your ability to be able to create the environment that enables that autonomy, that allows the team to make decisions without fear of failure, without being worried about, what's the leader going to say, what's my boss going to say, am I going to get in trouble for this? You have to accept that failure is going to happen, and we'll talk about that in just a second. One very important thing, and you know this is actually one of the best parts about all this remote working stuff, is that if you're paying attention, you're going to actually see what your team's flow zone is. I call it the flow zone. And all I really mean by this is if you sit back and you watch, and if you look at Teams or Slack or whatever, if you're using any of those tools, what you're going to see is that there are kind of a bit of a sine wave or a curve where the team becomes like really active, and there's a lot of stuff happening over the course of a day, and even throughout the week. You're going to start to see, okay, look, between 9:30 and 11. Man alive, Slack just lights up and people are going nuts and things are happening. And of course, tapers off around lunch, but then it happens again between 2 and 3:30, that kind of thing. Watch out for those. Grab yourself a notebook. If you're a leader and you're not carrying a notebook with you all the time, do it. But make yourself a note. Say, man, I'm seeing a lot of these trends. What you're looking at there is a hint towards your team's flow zone. And your job as a leader is to protect that. You have to protect that. That is one of the most valuable things that you will ever have. And your job is just block. You are absolutely the offensive tackle right there. You are trying to make sure that nobody gets in the way of that flow zone. And so, oftentimes I'll tell people, look, don't take it to the team, take it to me during those times. Or, hey, look, no meetings right now. Look, we're all on Zoom, we're all on the different things right now. But consider it. If you know what your team's flow zones are, then protect them and block out that time and say, look, guys, I recommend you turn email off. I'm not going to send you an email between this, or at least I don't expect you to respond to it. Find those times and protect them as if they were the Hope Diamond, because that is absolutely one of the most powerful and greatest things that you're ever going to have. That's where productivity really lies. It's not in the guys that are up at 11 o'clock at night. It's not the folks that are doing the weekend work or that kind of thing, especially right now, because none of us are taking time off. We're all working, it seems like, 24/7. But that's where the productivity lies. So find those times, identify them, recognize them, and protect them, right? Super important. In the meantime, be open to ideas. One of the things you need to be doing right now during norming is not just sitting back and saying, oh, man, it's time for a scotch and a cigar. Whew, we got past all the getting the people on board and getting them up to speed, and we know our job, and we're starting to kind of crank, and we're seeing our velocity kind of stabilize, and fantastic. Now is not the time to lighten up. Now is the time to get and talk. Get into the mode of communicating. If you're not doing like skip level one-on-ones, consider that. That's where maybe you've got a director, a manager, an employee, and directors are talking to employees directly and that kind of thing. Skip level stuff. Be doing that. Talk to people in groups. Talk to people individually. Set up polls. I don't care how you do it, but engage with them. Look for the things. Now, look, Agile, we're doing retros, right? We should be doing retros, at least at some point. And you as a leader in a leadership role, you're not excused from that. In fact, you should be setting the example with those, and saying, okay, look, what have I done right? What have I done wrong? I'll share with you that one of the things that I do at GSFS is I do have a standing weekly, you would typically call it a staff meeting, right? I call it the IT Innovation Leadership Meeting. And all it is my direct reports and myself in a room for an hour. And we have an agenda, and that agenda starts out with basically moments to celebrate or celebrations and announcements, where we take a few minutes, probably less than 5 minutes in most cases, and we talk about whatever the good news is or the bad news, anything that we might want to say, hey, man, we did this thing, or whatever. Celebrations, announcements, we get that covered, we talk through it. Sometimes it goes on for a little bit longer, but most times it's just making sure that everybody that's a part of that group understands that, hey, this person celebrated a birthday, or man, we got this one story across the board that was kicking our butt, or whatever it is. It's a time for everybody to hear that and celebrate it. And then we immediately move into, typically I'll do a little bit of a corporate overview right now. This was something that came about as a new thing with the quarantine, but I'll give a little update on like our return to work and sales numbers and that kind of thing. Typically 5, maybe 10 minutes. I try to keep it really short. And then what we have is we have a separate backlog of our work items, just things that as a leadership team, we've identified that we need to address and resolve. And it really runs the gamut. It's a very broad spectrum of, hey, we need to go focus in on this very technical thing. Maybe, I'm borrowing again from the old trope, and maybe our builds are running too long. What are we doing about that collectively as a group? But the whole idea is that we as a group, we're not just meeting and reporting status, because nothing drives me more batty than status reports or meetings where you go through and listen to somebody drone on about what they did, because they're doing their part. I trust them to do their part. I don't need to know. If I don't know, I'm not doing my job as a leader. So that's not what's important to me. What's important to me is that my leadership team is coming together and solving leadership problems. And so that's what we set that time for. I don't do any other, staff meeting or status meeting or anything like that. And I would encourage you maybe to think about the same thing. Keep a separate backlog. We're Agile. Keep a separate backlog and prioritize that with your team to say that, look, when we're setting aside this time as a leadership team, what are we trying to accomplish? What do we need to focus in on? We're carving out 1/40th of our time, or in the case of developers, especially in quarantine, 1/90th. But we're carving out this time to go work this problem. What are the problems? What are we trying to solve? And then when you do get a solution, when you do come up with something, communicate that. Goes right back to over-communicate. By the way, as we're going through each and every one of these stages, your job just gets bigger and bigger, right? You're still a coach, and you're still coordinating, and when you're in norming, you're still empowering. So you're growing as a leader as the team is forming. Last but not least, as we go through and we talk about norming, one of the things that is important for you to do is to make sure that you are setting aside time, whether you're just working with your POs or that you are a voice for making sure the team has time for automation and smoothing the development path. You're never going to get out of norming, excuse me, and into the performing stage, pardon me, if you're not taking the time, if you're not sharpening the axe, if you're not only investing in your people, but making sure all those little burrs under the saddle, that you're addressing those. And again, these are opportunities that you can find to help and show your team that you trust them, empower them to go and solve these things. That's a big part of what you're doing. Finally, okay, so we've talked about the forming, we've gone through storming, norming, we've talked about your jobs. Lastly, we've got performing. So performing is what we hope to achieve. This is where we want to get, and we want to ratchet our team to, and ideally, help them stay there. Our job is to prop them up and help them to stay in that performing world. And you'll know that you're there. The things that you're going to observe and the behaviors that you're going to see are that your team is motivated and they're knowledgeable, right? They're engaged with what's going on. They're motivated to get it done. They're not asking, the same questions. They're asking deeper questions. They're just going after it. They know what's up, right? And they're making it happen. Now that can be a little ambiguous. What I will typically say is a little hint or a little shortcut there is you'll know that you're there when you start to see your team doing a lot of swarming activities. This is where a problem arises, or whatever the case may be, and you'll observe the team kind of clutching together and swarming that problem and until it goes away. It's all the honeybees swarming the murder hornet, to be very topical, and really getting in there. That shows that the team trusts each other, that shows that they understand the mission, that they feel like they're empowered to be able to go do that. That's when they're really getting in and making it happen. When you start to see a lot of consistent swarming behavior, then you know that's a pretty good hint that maybe you're starting to see glimmers inside of that performing stage. You know, you'll also see that your team itself is starting to grow, and that a lot of the values that hopefully you've helped to instill along the way, they're the ones that are promoting, they're the ones exhibiting those and promoting them. Technical excellence, you know, the business acumen, all of these things, they're the ones that have kind of taken charge. They've grabbed the reins on those things. They're holding each other accountable. Anybody that may come on that's new, you know, they're showing them the ropes. They're really showing them around and giving them the lay of the land. They're really taking ownership of that. And that's what you want. You know, at this point, the group should be making many, if not most, of the decisions autonomously. You know, your job now is support. You're there to support the team. And this, you know, I want this for every single leader out there. I want you to get to this place. Because when it's happening, and it's happening with your team, and you've gone through all that, you've done all the hard work, to see your team in that place, rallying around it, and they're just doing it. And now your job is still to coach, and still to help coordinate, and all those things. But you know, mostly a big part of your job is there to support, because they know what's up. They know the right thing to do, and they're getting it done. That's a beautiful thing. Now, let's say you get there. Let's say you get your team there, and you will. You know, no doubt about that. A big part of support is watching for the backslide. And backslides happen in all the most curious ways. I've seen it happen. One of the most common triggers is you have somebody that finds a better opportunity, and they go and do their thing. Look, it happens. I mean, you know, each and every one of us have left a job to go take a better opportunity. It's a natural thing, right? I say better opportunity, a different opportunity, one that's better for them. And so what's going to happen, or you have some kind of change in the team, or some kind of change in you know, the company. I've seen it with leadership changes that were completely outside of IT. I've seen it with individual changes in their life. I've seen team members that have gone through, you know, very personal things, a divorce, or you know, welcoming a new child, and those can be very disruptive, because when you're at that peak, when your team is right there on that edge, and they're in that performing spot, they're in that stage, they're kind of riding that wave, it doesn't really take much at all to regress and to have them fall back. And look, I wish I could tell you that it was just they would fall back to norming, or they would fall back to storming, but oftentimes it can be a complete regression. They can fall all the way back. And it's not their fault. Look, it's human behavior. It's part of what we study as leaders, and it's part of what we have to be in tune with. But your job is to watch out for it. And in that supporting role as a leader, stay with it. Stay with them, you know, be on top of it. Other things that you need to be doing, other things you need to be watching out for, and you should be doing this or building on this all along. You know, make your onboarding process as painless as you possibly can. Nothing is worse than having a developer that has to go through a week's worth of, I have to install what? And how did this work? And oh, this environment variable, and oh, I've got to have that batch script, not that. Oh, okay. Look, it exists in every, you know, sufficiently complicated environment. But Lord, is it a pain. So give your team that mission to say, make it that much easier for the next guy. Everybody that comes on board should be documenting all the things that went wrong. And frankly, one of the first jobs that new guy ought to have maybe should be helping to go fix that. You know, that's a great opportunity to partner them up with somebody and say, you felt this pain? Cool. Let me partner you with this person or that person, and you two are going to go fix that, and then make it a little bit easier for the next guy, and so on and so forth. And then last but not least, you know, have fun. I know it's kind of crazy, but all along, you know, one of my personal you know, principles whenever I talk about my leadership style, I really sincerely believe in having fun. It's been a consistent thread throughout my career, and where I've had the most success is any place where I'm happy, and anybody that I'm working with, you know, they're happy too. And So try. That's all I can say is find somebody in the org, find your own wingman or wingwoman, and laugh, make a joke, laugh at yourself. That's probably the biggest one. So a quick time check here. Looks like we're at about the 45-minute mark. I do want to touch on very quickly though, developing your style. So as you mature as a leader, as you kind of move forward as a leader, you're gonna naturally develop a style, and that's to do so organically is fine, but maybe not the best approach. I would say that my leadership style was born of watching mentors early on, but then what I quickly realized is that I needed to go out and seek something more, and so I started doing a lot of reading that wasn't a technical manual, that wasn't some new language. It wasn't a new thing. I actually dove into more of the soft skill side, looking at how are other people doing this? What is leadership, and what does that look like? And I've had certain things that have resonated with me and that I've incorporated into my own personal style. I'm in particular right now, and I have been for a while, a big fan of Jocko Willink and his authoring partner, Leif Babin. They've authored a book called Extreme Ownership, which really, really resonated with me. Now, it's not going to resonate with everyone because it has kind of it's kind of the hyper-masculine sort of military thing, which, believe me, I never served. I never had the honor of serving, but there is something very powerful about the message, very direct about the messaging that resonated with me. I've shared that with my team before. And before I wrap, and we'll toss it over to some questions again. Get those questions in. We'll cover those in through the Q&A feature. Get those in, and we'll cover them. But the points that I've made, or the things that I've adopted from all different sources, and what I consider a part of my personal style, and maybe you can take a thing or two. Admitting mistakes. Never let a good mistake go to waste. You're going to screw up, and if you do, that's fine. But if you're not learning from it, that's not fine. So admit your mistakes and learn from them. Take extreme ownership. Again, this is one of the things that I took from the book. That was very much about look, blaming anybody else, that's just not effective. Get in there and solve it. Go find out what the problem is and solve it. Believing in the mission at hand, believing in whatever it is that you're doing. Look, as a leader, if you aren't 100% behind what it is that you're trying to get accomplished, your team's going to read that. You're going to reflect that right back on them, and you don't have a chance of ever getting into performing, maybe not even into norming, because they're going to sense that off of you. They're looking to you to be able to provide that, and if you don't believe in what you're trying to do, they aren't either. Other things are simplifying the plan. One of the things everybody that has worked with me for any length of time knows that one of my favorite sayings is, do the simplest thing that could possibly work. Oftentimes I'll have groups that come into me with all kinds of different problems. They've asked my advice, and maybe it's a cop-out at this point, but 9 times out of 10, I'm going to tell them, okay, what is the simplest thing that could possibly work? 9 times out of 10, that's what they go off and do. Setting small goals and simplifying the plan, 2 very, very important things. If people don't understand the plan, then they're never going to get to a place where they can wing it. You can't go off plan if you never understood the plan to begin with. This is super important with Agile, guys, because we are incremental and we are adapting to change. If we don't have the bigger picture and we haven't broken it down into digestible chunks, then going off script just means ad hoc. You're just winging it, and you're never going to reach your objectives. You're never actually going to accomplish what it is that you set out to accomplish. Prioritize and execute. Make sure that you're staying calm. See it, solve it. A very big thing. Another one of my personal favorites is observe, orient, decide, and act. So if you're faced with this is super important, especially in emergency situations. Take a second, look around, figure out what you're going to do, and then do it. Build trust. Make sure that you're trusting folks, and you'll get the same in return. Embrace the suck. This is a great one I got from the Extreme Ownership book. It's very common in military circles where, look, no situation is perfect. Get in there and deal with it. The only easy day was yesterday, and that's going to be super true for you as a leader. But again, and I want to follow up with, end on having a sense of humor, because Lord knows I'm certainly the guy that deserves to get laughed at quite a bit. So take the time to do that for yourself, and you'll be a happier person, and your team's going to love you for it. So with that, I'm gonna toss it back over to Will, and we'll see if we got any questions.
Great, thanks. So we do have several questions, and just so everyone knows, we do have 9 minutes left, so we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. So the first question for you, Greg, is, well, you mentioned with team members that with various different skills, and they're doing all of the work, like QA and dev. Is there worry about them context switching too much?
To be blunt, I don't think so. And here's my own personal perspective on this. And look, opinions are going to vary, but my perspective on this is pretty simple. I don't think it's right or reasonable to hand over the function of QA. And I actually want to back up here for a second, because a lot of people don't know this about me. A good portion of my technical career was spent in managing quality assurance departments, and I've got to know that part of the world very, very, very intimately for insurance companies, tax companies, security companies, and so forth. So QA is definitely something where I spent a lot of time. Automation. I could talk to you all day long about boundary conditions and equivalence classing and so forth. But here's the realization that I came to, is that if you have a situation where quality is on the line, which is every situation, if you ask me, then we hear the trope all the time about, well, you've got to back that up. And what I mean by that is there's a longstanding thing where the cost of a bug is so much cheaper whenever you get it in upfront. And long story short, at the end of the day, what I believe in this is that if I'm going to ask a developer to wake up at 3 in the morning to go solve a problem, then they should be the one testing and certifying that work. They're the ones that should be the ones saying, yeah, my stuff is good, because I do believe in automated testing. I do believe in integration testing and unit testing and so forth, manual testing where it becomes appropriate. And I think that's the responsibility of the developer. You're the ones that are doing that. If you look across several fields, you'll find aerospace and medical are both leaning into this, where the QA function is changing pretty rapidly. So context switching for me, is it a context switch? I don't really think so. If you don't have security and quality in mind as you're writing the code, then I would beg to say that I actually want your context to switch, and I want it to switch to one where you're focused on those things and they're a part of what you're developing. So that would be that's my take on it.
Great, thanks. And so you mentioned some of these, but what are some of the signs of transitioning between the stages?
Man, I wish it was just as simple as like they would hang a flag and say, okay, we moved out of forming, we're into storming now. There's no black and white to it. That's one of the downsides of the 4 phases, is that you can be in between. It's a gradient. It's not a stair step. That's a challenge for you as a leader. That is one of the greatest challenges, and that's why you have to take it holistically. You have to look at all 4 stages and be cognizant of the things that are going to happen during all 4 and what your job is during each one of them, because more often than not, unfortunately, you're going to see signs and traits of 2 or more of those happening simultaneously. And the problem is compounded if you actually have more than one team. So I wish I could tell you that there was an easy way to see just, oh, well, we've moved out of this and we're into this. When you start to see more of one particular stage's behaviors than the others, I think it's safe to say that you're probably you can categorize yourself as being in that stage. But yeah, it's a gradient. And so you just have to be super in tune and connected with your team.
Cool. So if you inherit an existing team, how do you figure out what stance you should be taking to try and help them?
You know, one of the most important things you do right out of the gate is unless there is some super compelling reason, and I'm almost to the life and death perspective on this, change nothing. Observe, orient, decide, and act. So your first phase is when you inherit a team, you're going to be in observation mode. And frankly, even if you're building on a new team, you should be, during that forming phase, you should be observing more than you're doing much of anything. Learn what's going on. It's like coming onto a project where there's some big existing system and you don't know really anything about that. So you're not just going to jump in and start making changes, right? Because you don't know why that line of code was there necessarily, or why they chose to use one data type over the other, or whatever the case may be. Same thing with the team. What you don't want to do is be disruptive in that. But ideally, try to figure out, odds are, since there was a change in leadership, now that you've been through this and now that you're going to go off and you're going to read more, you're going to get the idea that you should understand that your team is probably going to fall back to at least storming and possibly even kind of some of those forming behaviors just based on your arrival, which is great. Don't take that as a bad thing. Take that as something to say, cool, now I've got the opportunity to build some trust with this team, show that I'm a listener, that I'm not just going to change things and try to make it my way. I'm truly going to lead and support and use that as an opportunity to build them back up into that performing stage.
Great. All right. I'm actually going to hop down to one last question that we're going to have time for. And for those of you who had questions that we didn't get to, if you could post your questions on sketch.com after the fact, that would be great. For teams that have been formed from the remains of an old team or product that is used to working with silos and waterfall, BA, dev, how do you help to get them going as a team?
Honestly, again, I would go back to just those same principles. At that point, if you've got the assemblage of other fragmented teams, or you've had some kind of significant change, and hopefully you learned here that those things typically trigger some regression in terms of the stages, and you're kind of starting from scratch, as it were. But in that particular case, again, it's one of those where you definitely want to sit down, listen to the war stories, listen to the team, talk it over, figure out, what their motivations are, get a sense for that. But more than anything, coach and observe, and just be there. Don't be the guy that comes in and says, okay, I'm going to go build the ragtag team and we're going to be the Dynamo 8 or something. You gotta kind of work it with some kid gloves and be very sensitive, be very empathetic, be a great listener, and then look, you're perfectly capable of helping them through the stages. Any team can get to that performing place. I firmly believe that, but you as a leader, the job's on you.
Great, thanks. We are out of time, so thank you all for attending today's session. And Greg, thank you for sharing. We value continuous improvement and your feedback, so please complete a survey for the session by logging into sketch.com, locate the session, and then click the feedback survey button. The recording of this session will be available tomorrow, and to view the recording, just locate the session from your sketch.com schedule and click the video stream button. We hope you enjoy the rest of your virtual Agile shift and have a good day.
All right, thanks everybody.